Israel camped. Israel camped on the plains of Moab along the Jordan across from Jericho. Caleb heard reports that Balak, king of Moab, was gathering forces and sending out messengers to Midian and other peoples of Canaan. He intends to make an alliance with neighboring nations to keep us out. He won't succeed, Caleb vowed, pacing in front of his tent. He couldn't put his worry into words, and Joshua would wait upon Moses to make a decision. I don't trust the Midianites. Something is wrong. I feel it. What? They're too friendly. They're related to Moses' family. Caleb knew as well as anyone else Moses' wife Zipporah had been a Midianite, and her father Jethro had been chieftain. When the Lord had brought the Israelites out of Egypt, Jethro had met Moses at the mountain of God and returned to him Zipporah and Moses' two sons. Jethro had even advised Moses on selecting men from among the tribes to help him judge a birthing nation. A wise man, Jethro. Jethro was a man of honor, Joshua, but Jethro was long dead. Zipporah is not even a memory to these people, and Moses' sons are trained up in the way of the Lord. They have nothing in common with their relatives who bow down to Baal. You judge them harshly, Caleb. Moses says that we're to treat them as brothers. The women do not act like sisters. Have you sent anyone to see what's going on in Shittim? Joshua frowned. No. Perhaps you should. Perhaps you should discuss these concerns with Moses. Perhaps you should pray and ask God why these Midianites are so friendly and if we should have commerce with them. He had failed to keep the impatience out of his voice. Joshua glowered. Moses is our leader, not I. Does that mean you can't think for yourself? Caleb watched the color surge into Joshua's face and his eyes darken. Some of the men are leaving camp and going over to the Midianite settlements. Did the Lord tell us to mingle with these people? At one time, a long time ago, Moses had reason to trust the Midianites. I'm asking if they're trustworthy now. If an opportunity arises, I will ask. Make the opportunity. Caleb left before he said harsher words. He called his sons together and their sons. You will not talk with the Midianites or have anything to do with them. Has Moses ruled on the matter? Caleb turned to Arden. I have ruled on the matter, and I am your father. They had learned not to argue with him. No further questions were asked, but others training with Caleb's sons did as they pleased, spending their leisure hours visiting with Midianites. They brought back stories of how friendly and how beautiful the young women of Midian were. Moses had married one after all. Was it any wonder they were so attracted? And the feasting that went on beneath the spreading oaks was unlike anything they'd experienced in their desert life. Caleb came upon the young men gathered tightly, whispering, laughing, eyes bright, cheeks flushed. You should come see for yourselves. His sons wanted to go and pressed Caleb daily for permission. Everyone is going. We're the only ones who show such a lack of hospitality to Moses' relatives. You will not go over to them. Kamri lets his sons go. And Salu is a Simeonite. You answer to me. And I say no. If you ask again, I'll find work to keep you so tired you won't be able to stand, let alone think about Midianite women or their feasts. Despite Caleb's warnings, some of the Judean men went to visit the Midianites. They didn't return until late. Several missed morning worship. One collapsed during training exercises. Caleb had no sympathy or patience. Get your face out of the dirt. The young man struggled to his feet, sallow, trembling, unable to look Caleb in the eye. Go back to your tent, Asriel. Caleb glowered in disgust. Go now before I beat you into the ground. He watched the young man stumble away. Turning to the others, he pointed after Asriel. Can any man in that condition stand against the enemy? That is what happens when you stay out all night. You are worse than useless. You will cost the lives of your brothers. Never forget, we serve the Lord, the God of Israel, and we are preparing to enter Canaan at his command. Our inheritance is over there. He stretched out his arm. The Canaanites will not throw open their gates to welcome us. Balak is building a force against us. We do not have time to dance and sing and feast with Midianites. The Lord has sent a plague upon us, the people cried out. The people wailed, mourning the young men who were dying. Why? A mother cried. We have done everything God has asked of us, and now he kills our children. Why? Asriel died. He was the first of many. None of Caleb's sons were sick, but he questioned them anyway, pressing until they told him what the others had told them about the Midianites and their comely young women and the feast that went on beneath the spreading oaks. No wonder God is killing us, Caleb wept. We've sinned against him. Caleb looked at Joshua sitting beside Moses with the other elders, gathered to discuss the plague that was spreading throughout the camp. Hundreds had died, and hundreds more fell ill every day. How have we sinned? Someone asked. The Midianites. They're our friends, another insisted. What friendship do we have with those who worship idols? Remember Egypt? Caleb had to remind himself that the men gathered here had no recollection of what happened there other than what had been told to them. They were the sons of those who had come out of slavery. The Moabites and Midianites know we belong to the God who destroyed Egypt with plagues. They know we serve him. They are cunning enough to realize they must drive a wedge between us and the God we serve. So they send their beautiful young women to entice the young men into Baal worship. These women were sent to turn the hearts and minds of our sons away from God, and God is judging us for our unfaithfulness. I've seen nothing of that sort in our camp or ours. Will we always be like this? Caleb shouted, furious. Would they never understand? Talking and talking, and still you fail to understand. God does not send a plague without cause. He does not punish without reason. We must examine ourselves so we can repent. Moses leaned close to Joshua and spoke to him. Joshua nodded his head and whispered back. Agitated, others began talking at once. Salu, Caleb said loudly. My sons tell me your son Zimri visits the Midianites. Salu, the Simeonite, looked less than pleased to be the center of attention. He goes to tell them of our God. He brought back a girl with him, another added. Moses' head came up. Joshua stared. Salu shook his head. No, you're wrong. I was on my way here when I saw your son with her, the man said. I stopped him and asked what he was doing. He said he wanted all his friends to join him in the celebration, and this woman, Cosby, had come to encourage us. He said she is the daughter of one of the Midianite chieftains. Zur, I think is his name. Invite his friends to a celebration? Men looked at one another. What did he mean by that? Salu the Simeonite looked less than pleased. Oh, sorry. Abruptly, Phinehas rose and strode away from the gathering of elders. His father, Eleazar, high priest and son of Aaron, called after him. Phinehas did not answer. He went into his tent and came out with a spear in his hand. Caleb rose, staring after him. His heart raced. The son of the high priest looked neither to the right or the left as he strode toward the tents of Simeon. Caleb had never seen such an expression of wrath on a man's face, even in battle. Moses' eyes went wide. At a word, Joshua was on his feet and following the high priest's son, Caleb, right on his heels. What's the matter? The others clamored to their feet. What's happening? Phinehas broke into a run, spear high in his fist. He gave no battle cry as he charged. People scattered before him. Caleb and Joshua ran after him, others falling in behind him. Among the tents of Simeon rose sounds of celebration. A circle of men and women stood around the entrance of a tent, staring, restless, moving and pressing in and leaning forward to see more. Get back! At Joshua's shout, the people parted like a sea, exposing the debauchery that had so excited them. Some ducked their heads and ran, diving into their tents to hide themselves. Phinehas entered the tent. With a loud cry, he planted his feet on either side of the couple, writhing on the mat, raised the spear in both hands, and brought it down with his full strength. The Midianite girl had seen him and screamed. Too late, she tried to kick back from beneath Salu's son, still in the throes of violent passion. Phinehas bore down on the spear, driving it through them both, pinning them to the ground. Salu's son died quickly, but Cosby's clawed and shoved, kicked and screamed, pressing her heels until blood spilled from her mouth. Phinehas held the spear until there was no movement, and then let go and backed away, gasping for breath. Moses ordered the Israelite sons to stay away from the Midianite camp. No further contact was to be made with the Midianites. Eleazar made atonement for the people who stood silent in fear of the plague. How many more would die before the Lord took mercy on them? From this day forth, Moses told the people, treat the Midianites as enemies. Kill them. They treated us as enemies. He called for a census. 24,000 had died in the plague. Still, Israel's numbers had increased since the first census before the mountain of God. Only 2 men remained from the generation of slaves who had been delivered from Egypt, Joshua from the tribe of Ephraim and Caleb of Judah. The Lord has called for vengeance on the Midianites, Moses told the people. Arm 1,000 men from each tribe and send them into battle. Phinehas would lead them into battle, taking with him the holy items and the trumpets for signaling. Whispers of alarm went through some ranks. 12,000 against hundreds of thousands? They would be slaughtered. Faithless, even now faithless. The Lord is with us, Caleb shouted. Fear no man, Joshua called out, raising his sword. After years of drilling and practicing, the young men were eager to fight and prove themselves in battle. Everyone wanted to go. Caleb called for a lottery to eliminate all but 1,000 men God would assign to fight for Judah. His sons were among them. They stood ready, dressed for battle, swords in hand, shielded by their faith in the living God they served. They had received the Lord's instruction. Now it remained to be seen if they would obey and receive victory. Caleb found himself left behind with the other leaders of the community, Joshua among them. Neither was at ease with the waiting. Caleb heard the shofar blast in the distance and then the war cries of 12,000 men going into battle. He longed to run with those men, to yield his sword, to kill God's enemies, but he waited with Joshua and the multitude. Let the younger men be tested. Hour after hour passed. Moses prayed. Joshua prayed. Caleb tried, but his mind was in the midst of that battle, hands clenched and sweat pouring. His sons had gone out to battle, his sons. Don't let them fail, Lord. Hold them to their word. Keep their minds fixed on you. Keep them faithful. 40 years he had waited in the promised land. 40 years he had wandered with the sons of those who had refused to listen to his report about Canaan. Messengers arrived. The Midianites had been conquered. The 5 kings, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, killed, as well as Balaam, King Balak's advisor. The men were returning in triumph. Caleb noticed Moses' anger and joined Joshua and Eleazar, the high priest. What's wrong? The men are bringing back captives. Fear gripped Caleb. Would the Lord send yet another plague on them? Herds of cattle and flocks of sheep and goats were being driven toward the camp, and Caleb could see carts of plunder and men carrying all manner of goods they had taken from the Midianite cities and villages. Why have you let all the women live? Moses cried out against them. These are the very ones who followed Balaam's advice and caused the people of Israel to rebel against the Lord at Mount Peor. They're the ones who caused the plague to strike the Lord's people. Now kill all the boys and all the women who have slept with a man. Only the young girls who are virgins may live. You may keep them for yourselves. Those who had fought in the battle were commanded to remain outside of the camp. They were to wash themselves and their clothing and everything made of leather, goat hair, or wood. All gold, silver, bronze, iron, tin were to be, and lead were to be put through the fire. Every idol and item bearing the emblems and symbols of pagan gods would be melted down. The spoils were divided among the soldiers who had taken part in the battle and with the rest of the community. 1 out of every 500 persons, cattle, donkeys, goats, and sheep, was given as tribute for the Lord and placed in the care of the Levites. Caleb's sons returned to their tents with their share of the plunder. He stood as they approached, heat surging in their faces, every muscle taut. Misha and Marashah stood before him with the confidence of soldiers who had returned from a great victory. And indeed it had been. Not one Israelite had fallen. We've brought you presents, Father. I asked for nothing, nor did he want what they had brought back to him. You have not had the comfort of a woman since Jerioth and Ephrath died. And you think I will take a Midianite as my wife? I'm the one who told you to have no commerce with them. These girls are no longer Midianite. They belong to us now. If you will not have them as wives, take them as concubines. They know nothing of who we are or what we've been through, nor the God we serve. Then teach them as you taught us, Marius said gravely. Misha stepped closer. We must increase our numbers, Father, and you need women to accomplish that. He grasped one of the girls by the arm and yanked her forward. She's young and healthy and gave us no trouble. Do with her what you will. He pushed her forward. The girl looked at Caleb with calf eyes. He could see nothing in her expression to give him any idea of what she was thinking. He thought of the young Midianite women laughing and beckoning to the men he had trained, leading them away like lambs to the slaughter. 24,000 had died because men had been easily seduced into Baal worship. The girl had slender curves and smooth olive skin. She would become a beautiful woman. He put his hand on his sword and drew it. Though the girl's lips parted, she did not speak. Closing her eyes, she knelt and bowed her head. It'd be a waste to kill her, father. Misha made no move to stop him. Do you mock me? Caleb was 80 years old. All those who called you a dog are dead. You are respected by all who know you. You are my father. You would have led us into battle if God had called you to do it, Misha said. Moses said we were to keep the virgins. Marish spoke quietly. Hur stretched out his hand and drew another comely young woman forward. You deserve the best of our portion. The second young woman knelt beside the first, trembling. Misha grabbed Caleb's sword arm. They are yours, father. Make good use of them for all our sakes. Left alone, Caleb stood over the two young women, sword in hand. Judgment or mercy, Lord? What do I do? He waited, longing for a word, a sign from the Lord. He studied the two of them before him. One finally raised her eyes and looked at him. Her dark eyes shone with fear, but she did not beg for her life. The other girl, still trembling violently, began to sob. Caleb thought of the countless times God had shown mercy to him and to the people. Was it only accident or circumstance that had plucked these two young women from their foul culture and placed them in the midst of Israel? Or did God have a plan for them too? I am Caleb, put his hand over his heart. Caleb. The girl who was looking at him placed her hand over her heart. Maka, she touched and bowed the bowed head of her sobbing companion. Ifa. Life and death are before you. If you learn the law of God and obey, you will live. Maka frowned, perplexed. He spread her hands and shook her. She spread her hands and shook her head. Caleb scowled. Of course she couldn't understand his language, but she must learn the most important thing, language barrier or not. The Lord, he spoke firmly with a nod of expectation. The Lord, she understood the Lord. She spoke hesitantly and then drew up the girl beside her. She spoke to her. Then they both spoke together. The Lord was not enough to repeat what he said. They must understand he was not speaking of himself, but of the one they must learn to serve. Caleb stretched out his arm, pointing to the tabernacle where the ark of the Lord was hidden and the Holy of Holies. The Lord, he is God. Maka's beautiful eyes, dark eyes widened. The Lord, she spoke in awe. Her expression gave Caleb cause to hope. If these two young women learned that, they would have learned more than the people who had wandered and died in the wilderness. The Lord, he is God. The two young women repeated Caleb's words. Caleb sheathed his sword. He called to one of his granddaughters. He pointed at each of the young women his sons had given him and gave their names. See that they learn our language. Then they will learn the law of God. He would not have anything to do with them until they did. And that's the end of chapter 3.